Hi, YouTube. I'm gonna try to have a calm day today because on video I'm often cussing and screaming and shouting and, belligerent with people. So today we're gonna try to come across in a calm and reasonable tone because, the unfortunate reality is that in our legalistic culture, some people confuse emotion with a lack of ability to be reasonable. Today, I wanted to go over the case that I have started to feel against the US patent system. Why have I turned against the very idea that we should have a patent system at all? Well, it's quite simple, my friends and followers. Let's go into it. Let's get into this niche subject. First of all, software patents have run amok. The patent trolls are running completely rampant. Through the system, only the biggest players are capable of actually dealing with the patent trolls and everything and fighting back against the chicanery and I mean the bullshit games that they've been playing with people and everything and their inventions. And if these problems were not bad enough, once we start to peel below the surface, we start to discover that there's been a grand game played for the passage of the system that is a grand illusion that's been played, and the wool has been pulled over the eyes of the public, to say the least. How and in what manner was it pulled? Well, the argument historically has been that a patent system is necessary because of the fact that you need to incentivize innovation, otherwise, inventors will have no reason to invent at all. History begs to differ with this assertion. There were humans that were, basically inventing things long before the patent system had any pretext inside the that had any patent system and any patent protection. People still continue to create, intellectual property. And in a lot of cases, it was trademarks that, or not trademarks, but I mean trade secrets that these companies kept. But, quite often, it just wasn't necessary for something like this to exist at all. It didn't happen. It wasn't. It is not the case that before we had a patent system, nobody invented anything. So that argument kind of falls on its face and flat. We've had invention a lot longer than we have had any sort of patent protection for inventors. That has been the reality. I mean, what do you think? What do you think happened that the moment the U.S. created the patent system, the whole history of innovation, just began at that point? And that's ridiculous. And so a lot of this was based on common sense notions. And, one of the problems that this channel has gone over a lot of the time is that common sense has too much of a golden, glorious reputation inside the culture. A lot of people seem to think that this is the best way to deal with things and to do things is to adhere to the principles of common sense. It's just, there are a couple of problems with that. Now, for one thing, common sense isn't truly common. And another problem with that and flaw with that is that if you consider that for thousands of years, there were a lot of people who believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that all the planets and stars that were out there that we could absorb in the sky, not absorb, observe in the sky, were, had an orbit around us in the celestial order of things, and that we were, at the top of that hierarchy. And now from the modern scientific method and rigorous research that we live in a heliocentric solar system, and that the reality is that the universe is a lot larger than our solar system, and it is called a solar system because at the end of the day, the actual center of the system is the sun. Sun being solar being a word referring to the sun and it's thick and it's a candor. Anyways, this has been the reality. That was common sense. Geocentrism was common sense for thousands of years, and it turned out to be dead wrong. And I can confidently assert that it is quite likely that it is dead wrong in this case, too, that you need to incentivize innovation because there is a lengthy history of innovation before there was any such thing as a patent system or, intellectual property rights or any sort of patent protection that enabled people to gain an intellectual monopoly over their inventions and ideas, inside things. One other aspect of it is that if you are an author of a creative work, that is like a book of fiction, your patent extends beyond, for 80 years, which is just crazy. At the very least, these terms need to be reduced pretty drastically to be in line, at least with other patents. I do think that 20 years for even the pharmaceutical companies is a bit too long. I think that, a compromise of about, 7, 8 years or so would be a lot better than what we're going at, and everything with these 20-year systems, and to cut these terms down in size. But, this is what I would think of as copyright reform and intellectual property reform, not going in the direction of strengthening it, but as in, loosening the ties that, that enable these companies to, engage in such bad faith, attacks on everybody, and to troll effectively. To some people, the patent trolls are only the people that, patent things in order to sue companies. But I think that, in a lot of cases, it's somebody that's just, like Nintendo, and is mad that, somebody else is trying to make a third-party game, off of intellectual properties that belong to them. That would be another example of patent trolling to me. But of course, they're trying to keep that definition very narrow and everything. They want to make it just a few people. I want to expand the definition to include these kinds of people. Nintendo's patent trolling really bothers me and everything. And so their litigious nature, despite the fact that I own a Switch 2 and I'm pretty much a customer of theirs, and I will remain a customer. I'm just, I don't approve of everything they do. Some of the things they do piss me off. That's just it's just the reality. There are, just because I'm somebody that speaks out and owns a Switch doesn't mean I'm a fan of every goddamn thing Nintendo has ever done. I'm not a fucking bootlicker, for any company in particular. I've got my grievances with all of them, and that's how it will always be as far as, the way I feel about gaming. And, hey, at least you got that. I'm reasonable in that respect. But, so patents, what is the problem with them from my vantage point? You have a system, the statement that one must incentivize innovation, otherwise innovation will not occur, is one that is not supported by rigorous scientific research. The concerns that, led up to the creation of this system had no basis in, actual scientific research or literature that existed at the time of the formation of the system at hand. There was no actual need to be concerned in the first place that led up to the creation of it. It was an unjustified system that existed because some people were able to effectively gin up a panic about, the need to incentivize innovation. However, again, there was no rigorous research that said that without it, that people would not innovate. There just wasn't anything in anything in that respect. And, it's for these reasons that the system at hand drives me crazy, because, as an American, I don't really want, I do believe that when it comes to our concerns as a nation, we should at least wait until the science comes in and says that, these concerns are valid. We've looked into it. Our research indicates that there are many things to be concerned about and everything in regards to this issue, and that we have researched it and there's a problem. Unfortunately, we live in a nation where, if half the country wants to worry that an election was stolen, and everything, and everything, they will look for evidence to support that position and work backwards to try to prove a reality that for which there's very little in way of actual evidence, and that, quite a lot that this was not in fact the case. How does it make you feel as an American when you realize that so many of these systems that we take for granted are basically exist in a precarious state of fragility because of the fact that they have their entire foundation in untested ideological assumptions that never met scientific rigor and scrutiny in their lives? Our patent system was not justified on the basis of science. It was justified on the basis of what people believed was common sense at the time. Now, I don't have a lot of faith in common sense, especially as it pertains to guiding public policy, because it has a bad track record of actually being sensible. So-called common sense isn't actually necessarily sensible. It's just what most people think about a situation or misunderstand as being the sensible way of looking at things or reacting to things. So-called common sense may not be sensible at all. We just don't know. We have no way of knowing without actual scientific rigor and research to confirm what it's saying.